I guess everyone knows what is machine learning, I guess, right? Did anyone try to find out what is deep learning? You might have heard about this a lot, right? What is deep learning? Like you might have heard about these terms: artificial intelligence, deep learning, machine learning, all these terms thrown it, right? But then what is deep learning? Like how is it different from machine learning? Yeah. So again, it's fine. Like we have got started with machine learning. So we'll see what is deep learning. Right. Neural networks. Exactly. It teaches a computer to filter inputs through layers. Yes, sort of. So yeah, someone is saying it's subset of ML. Yes, it is a broad subset of ML. So yeah, I'll tell my journey with deep learning, how it started. So I went to an event. I had just like this, like how we are having a discussion, right? There also the author has started talking about deep learning. I was very fascinated and I wanted to like learn that topic. So and then I went to the internet and I felt like this, whatever is shown on the screen, right? I felt like that because I was going on all random directions like a drunk person, right? So there was no proper answer that I was getting, how to learn deep learning or like where to go and stuff like that. So but then again, I continued my journey and I was able to like get into this field of deep learning and similarly get a job of deep learning and have been involved with deep learning from past 2.5 years. But yeah, the topic of today is to clear this part, like what is deep learning and how is it different from machine learning and how you can use it for your use cases, right? So before you get started, two questions we need to understand: why now and how now. Why now? Why now is because deep learning is something which was there from ages, like it was there from 80s, but it never got popular to a stage where it is now. And the reason for that is the increase in computational power. So the main core reason behind the working of deep learning is GPU. You might have heard about it, right? You know what is a CPU and a GPU. GPU is the graphical processing unit, which we'll be using for games, right? The power of GPUs was not as much as it is now considered to a few years ago. So a few years ago, the power of GPUs was very little, and because of that, we had no capability of doing calculations at a very higher pace. In the neural networks, which are the sub part of the deep learning, main part, I mean main core behind deep learning, needed this power to be able to do. And that is why deep learning was not very popular for some time. But once that started happening, right, people started investing in the research towards deep learning and it has become too popular. It started beating machine learning left and right on various other tasks. And now it is kind of given that people choose deep learning over machine learning in general. How now is the way I'll going to be talking, like how do you proceed from here and understand what are all the components that are present in deep learning and how to go forward from there. So this is the structure of the course. We'll be learning the theory, background, and intuitions of a neural network. And we'll try to see if we can train a neural network with quality results. So we'll be having an assignment at the end of fifth session where you are supposed to train a very popular dataset, CIFAR10, to about 90% accuracy. And if you are able to do that, it means that you are decent in neural networks. You have an understanding of how neural networks work and how to train them. So that is kind of a project as such, and it needs a lot of collaboration. So you need to communicate with each other in the WhatsApp group, showing what are the things you tried out to others so that everyone can learn from each other and try to cross that 90% accuracy barrier. But again, like I said last time, people were not able to cross in the last batch. They were stuck at around 87%. That is the max they could achieve. But I'm hoping you will be able to do that. And we'll try to do that together. Again, we'll be having very intense classes, 5 intense classes of the content. So you would need to put a lot of effort over the coming few days, much more compared to what you might have kept for machine learning part, but that is because we are going to go at a great pace, and we are going to do this because I wanted to cover all the things that are necessary for you to be able to job ready in the field of deep learning. So you have already covered machine learning, but we are going to cover deep learning in such a way that you have both the theory concepts and similarly the practical concepts by the time you will be able to complete the course, right? So it is going to be intense, and I hope that you will be able to put in effort, required amount of effort to cross this stage. And again, we need a collaborative effort from each other because you will not be able to do it alone. If you are trying to do it alone, you will not be able to cross 80% accuracy also. So only if we can work together, we'll be able to cross that barrier of 90%. And that is the case for any learning as such. If you are working together with people, right, and sharing knowledge with each other, you will go at a much faster pace compared to if you are trying to learn alone. That is what I have observed over past few years. I was doing that mistake previously, trying to do things alone, but now I try to do things in a community if possible. And we have a good community here. We have a community of students who are learning the same content at the same time. So please do collaborate in the WhatsApp group. Again, so this is how we are going to cover the next 6 classes. In today's class, we will understand what is deep learning and how is it different from machine learning and various applications on top of that one. In the next class, that is, which is coming probably day after tomorrow, we are going to cover the theory behind neural networks and how do they work in general. In the third class, we'll try to write our first neural network. So we'll code a neural network from scratch on a data set called MNIST. MNIST is like the ABC of English. So whenever someone gets started with learning English, right? So they start learning alphabets A, B, C. Similarly, whenever someone gets started with deep learning, the first data set they choose is MNIST. This is similar to Titanic dataset. I hope everyone might have already worked with Titanic dataset, right? Did you? Yeah. So Titanic dataset is the basic of machine learning. So someone, when they are getting started with machine learning, they will start with Titanic dataset. Similarly, someone, when they are starting with deep learning, they'll start with MNIST dataset. So you will write your first neural network in third class to solve the task of MNIST and reach around 98% accuracy, hopefully. And after that, we will see more complex neural networks, which can solve the task of image classification much more better compared to what you would do in third class. So there are different architectures in neural network as well. We'll cover those things. What are the different kinds of neural networks that are there? So we'll come to a new different kind of neural network called convolutional neural network in the fourth class. And the task of fifth class is again to try out various techniques, learn about various techniques to reach industrial qualities results on a popular data set. And then we'll cut off from there. We'll try to complete the assignment, and then we try to go to deep learning for NLP. So we'll have a very basic introduction of how you can apply deep learning for NLP. So this is the agenda of the course so far from now. So we have covered the NLP part for machine learning previously. From now onwards, we'll be only dealing with deep learning. And again, these are some myths with deep learning. So you might have come across these probably if you try to learn about deep learning online. So some myths are machine learning is needed for you to get started with deep learning. So that is not true. You don't need machine learning in general to understand how deep learning works. That is, you will get to know over the period of the course. You will see that what machine learning and deep learning are almost completely different, although they are used on the same use cases. There's not much of a need for machine learning, so that you need to be good in deep learning. So that is the point. After that, we will see that there is no need for mathematics for a lot of deep learning. You need to understand how the mathematics works, but you don't need to derive the formulas as such or keep all the mathematical formula in mind. So that is not needed. This is the case of machine learning as well. You need to understand how the algorithm is working and what is the intuition behind it, rather than like finding out what is the mathematics involved, complete mathematics. That is not required. And that is the task of researchers. That is not the task of engineers. We are engineers, we are not researchers. Although we can be researchers if you are interested. And then the third myth is if you want to be going to jobs, or like if you have to prove that you are good at deep learning, you need to do a lot of certifications. That is not true. You don't need to do a lot of certifications. If you are trying to do a lot of certifications, it will be like this. You're going in all directions. You're not going in a single direction. What you need to do is you need to do one thing which is very good, like one course which is very good, like the Board Infinity course, which teaches you the content from scratch. So you need to take one course and do it properly, 100%. If you do 10% of all 10 courses, right, it is not useful. So I hope you'll be able to put in 100% effort for the deep learning course from now onwards. And then the fourth point. The fourth point is you need to put in 1-2 years of effort so that you need to be good at deep learning. That is also not true. So you can put effort of 3 months at a faster pace, and you should be able to be good enough to be eligible for most of the jobs. If you are able to go in the right direction, right? Like as I said, if you are not going in the right direction, you'll take a lot of time, like a drunk person who is trying to reach the home. But if you follow the right direction and if you put good amount of effort, you should be able to be in a good position within 3 months. And then the final point is not possible for changing career paths in between. So again, I don't know if this is applicable for you or not. So this is applicable for working professionals. If someone is working in any field and they want to like get started with machine learning field or deep learning field, it is always entirely possible because the field is new and the talent is limited. So people might be thinking that there are less jobs and more people, but actually the contrary is true. There are more jobs and there are less qualified people. There are more people, but there are less qualified people. That means the ones who has knowledge in this field. So if you are able to have decent amount of skills, right, you should be able to crack a career in machine learning or similarly deep learning. Only it will be difficult if you are already 10 to 15 years into the industry. You have been working in the industry for 10 to 15 years. And if you want to make a switch, then it will be difficult. But otherwise, it's particularly, it is completely possible. Like I did it as well. I did 2 career switches. I went from software engineer to machine learning engineer. And then I went from machine learning engineer to deep learning engineer. So you can do as well. So what is machine learning? So can someone tell what is machine learning? You have already done the machine learning course, right? Are you able to hear me? Okay. What? Are you not able to hear me? Hello? Okay. Yeah. Great. So can someone tell what is machine learning? You have already covered the part of machine learning in your course, right? So I hope everyone understands what machine learning is and how it is different from traditional programming. ML is the study of computer algorithms. Not true. No, ML is not study of algorithms. Yeah, so Shiv and Apurva are correct. Exactly. Khalid is correct. Sandesh is also correct again, but I have not asked what is deep learning. But again, we are doing machine learning. Society thinks like this, that you are building robots and your friend, I mean, this is a joke as such. Your friends might think that you are connecting your brain and pulling out information out of that one, or you have built a brain. And what do the other software engineers think? The other software engineers think that you are minting a lot of money, which is not true. You almost make the similar amount of money as software engineers. Only thing is, you may make 10% more, or there is more hype at this point of time. And what does your boss think of you? You might think you are Tony Stark, you can do anything. So what he will do is he will dump data on top of you and ask you to give results, even if the data has any patterns or not. So that is one problem of being a machine learning engineer. You have so many expectations on top of you. And what I think I do, I think I'm an Einstein trying to solve the biggest problem in the world, right? But what I really do, I use a library, scikit-learn or something like that, and I import 1-2 lines of code. But again, this is a joke. What machine learning is this? Machine learning is the way to teach a computer to learn from data. And it is different from traditional programming in the sense that in traditional programming, there needs to be a human who sits down and writes particular rules. Rules to identify patterns and take a particular decision. So for example, look at this example. You have a person who is standing in the first image, she is running in the second image, she is cycling in the third image, and she is playing golf in the fourth image, right? So if I have to write a program myself to identify what is happening, how can I do that? So probably I can use a variable called speed of the person to identify if she is walking or running or cycling. Yes. If speed is less than 4, so I'll say she is walking. This is one attribute I could find and use. If speed is less than 4, if she is walking, probably or not, she's running. I can extend it to consider the case of running as well. But now if I want to include cycling as well, so what I'll do is if speed is less than 4, she's walking. If speed is less than 12, she's running. But if speed is greater than 12, probably she's biking. Right? Biking means cycling. This is all fine. Like you are able to do it. But then how do you do it for the fourth image? Should I say that she's going to hold a hockey stick in a slanted direction with legs crossed, turned around, face not showing me in my direction? I can't write all these things, right? It's not possible. You can't make a human write all these things. He can still do, but he will not be able to write down all the conditions. There will be infinite conditions you need to do. Your code will become bulky and it will have many edge cases. You will not be able to get the results. So it is not always possible for human to write down a program to achieve all the corner conditions. So what we do, we'll ask a machine to do that. We'll ask a machine to solve about task by looking at a lot of data. We provided it a lot of images of person walking, person running, person biking, person doing a whatever, maybe playing golf or something else, right? Once we provide a lot of images, we tell it that, okay, I have provided the images and I will label it saying that, okay, this person is running, this person is walking, this person is cycling. We give you all the labels also. You know what is labels, right? In machine learning, you might have already learned that for data, you will have a label. So you are giving the data, you are giving the outputs, that is the labels, and you are asking the computer to figure out, right? Figure out the rules. What are the rules that it needs to come up with to do that particular task? So it will try to look at multiple features and try to come up with the exact amount of features that it needs to do to solve this task. But again, this is not completely machine learning, but you can think machine learning is like this, like how to come up with the rules to solve a particular task, right? Is this clear what machine learning is? So if anyone asks you what is machine learning in interview, right, you need to give the perfect answer. If you are not able to do that, it kind of shows that you don't have the exact knowledge of what machine learning is. So we need to get this right. We need to get this right in the first shot, saying that what is machine learning, you should be able to answer. And then in machine learning, we have multiple types of machine learning. I think you have covered supervised and unsupervised. You might not have covered reinforcement, because reinforcement is for research as such. So you need not worry about it, but it is going to come probably after 5 years maybe. But at this point of time, it's not in the industry phase. It is in the research phase still. So you might have covered both the supervised and unsupervised, right? Did you cover both the supervised and unsupervised algorithms? Cool. So can someone tell me what is a supervised algorithm? Labeled data when we have the target feature. Yes. when we have target as output as dependent variable might always be there, right? Yeah, dependent variable is the target variable. Exactly. So when we use supervised learning, when we use it when we know the outputs already for the data that we are going to train on. By outputs, I mean the labels. When you are already given the labels, you can use that and supervise a machine to understand input and try to give it an output under the supervision of the input and output that is already given, right? That is a supervised algorithm. Supervised algorithm is when you are training a model with both the inputs and outputs. Unsupervised is when you don't have any outputs, you just have data and you are supposed to figure out patterns on top of that one, right? But in supervised, you have the labels. Exactly. So it can apply what it has learned from the past data to work on new data, that is the test data, to give predictions. Exactly. So this would be a simple classification task, dog versus cat. So it has two labels, dog or cat, right? So this comes under the area of supervised learning. So this is the data set we will be working on at the end of the course as such, not at the end of fifth session. So we'll be working on this data set to figure out if you are given any image in this, right? We would be able to tell what is the label, whether it is an airplane, automobile, bird, cat, deer, dog, frog, horse, sheep, truck. We should be able to do that. So that is what we will be doing by the end of fifth session. So what is deep learning? Okay, deep learning, when I type out in internet, right, I get this broad definition. It is a broad part of broader family of machine learning methods based on artificial neural networks with representation learning. It can be supervised, semi-supervised, or unsupervised. But what does it mean? I don't understand. Right? So it is actually not a lot of different from machine learning. It is like just replace the algorithm that is present in machine learning with neural networks. It is deep learning. You can think of it like that. Right? So what are the machine learning algorithms that you have learned? For the part of the course, you might have learned few algorithms, right? In machine learning. What algorithms did you learn? For doing any classification task or anything? Let's ignore regression for now. Great. Yeah, logistic regression, decision tree, random forest. Yeah, KNN. Exactly. So these are the algorithms you learn. So machine learning has a list of algorithms, right? Deep learning doesn't have these many algorithms. It only has one algorithm. That is neural network. Right? That is the difference between machine learning and deep learning you can think of. Only one algorithm, neural network. But you will see that even one algorithm is going to have many variants of that algorithm. So like you can think of it like different kinds of neural networks. Only one algorithm neural network, but it will have different variants in top of that one. Exactly. So we'll be having different varieties. So this is the difference between machine learning and deep learning. All of them do the same task. So if you have a car, van, bus or truck, all of them do the same task. What do? They transport you from one point to another point, right? But then some of them are more capable than the other in a particular task. So maybe, for example, the tank is more capable than the others in one terrain, like a very hard terrain or something like that. And again, probably car is better than the others in road, like that, right? So these are different ways of solving the same problem. You can think of like machine learning and deep learning are different ways of solving the same problem. Only thing is they use different algorithms. So machine learning might be using different algorithms like SVM, random forest, logistic regression, compared to car, van, and bus. Deep learning will be using a neural network compared to a tank. That is the difference. They all do the same thing. Only way is like they do it in a slightly different way because they are using different algorithms. That is the different machines that is present here. That is why they are different. But ideally, they all do the same task, the task of classification or regression or anything. So we can solve a task of any task in machine learning with deep learning and vice versa. Only thing is you will see machine learning is more popular than deep learning in use cases like the tabular data. You have already seen the tabular data, right? By tabular data, you have certain number of features and then you have target variable, that kind of data. For that kind of data, machine learning is more useful. But what you will see is deep learning is more useful for other kinds of data like images, speech, and voice. For these, you will see that deep learning is much more useful and gives better results, much better results than machine learning. So is this clear? What is the difference between deep learning and machine learning? Okay. Now we'll talk about a time from which deep learning started. So deep learning started in the year 2012. Until then, everyone is aware of neural networks, but then nobody was using neural networks to solve any task. Machine learning is completely used, even for the tasks of image, voice, or speech, right? People were using machine learning, they were not using deep learning. And what was the reason for that? Because nobody tried until then. And again, computational power was also not there until then. So because the computational power was not there, people were able to train neural networks. And since they were not able to train the neural networks properly, they were not able to get good results. So you will observe that training a neural network is much more difficult than training a machine learning algorithm. You will see that as part of the course. You need to do a lot of jumbling, trying out different things to get a good accuracy. Compared to machine learning, where it will always converge to a right point if you are having the right set of parameters. Deep learning is not like that. Deep learning is a lot of trial and error. So it is much more difficult than machine learning and it needs a good amount of computational power. But since the computational power was not there, people were not able to try random experiments and they were not able to get good results. But if they were able to do that, they would have got results which were much better than machine learning. That is what is happening now. Since we have the computational power, right, people were able to try a host of experiments and they got much better results than machine learning for various use cases. So in 2012, something happened. There is a competition called ImageNet Classification Challenge. ImageNet is a dataset having 1,000 classes of real-world objects and animals and things like that. So it is kind of considered very prestigious. So it is like an IIT JEE for computer vision engineers. You know, IIT JEE is very prestigious for students, right? Cracking it. So similarly, this challenge was very prestigious for all the computer vision engineers, and they used to try to solve it every year to reach out to the top. So they used to use machine learning in machine learning till 2012, but then from 2012 something changed. Just a minute. Sorry, yeah. Until 2012, machine learning was much more popular than deep learning because of the reasons we have discussed so far. In 2012, what happened is there is this guy called Alex. He joined under a professor who is very famous in the area of deep learning. But again, his professor was also not believing that neural networks will be able to solve this task. Right? But then he believed and he took this, he created a neural network called AlexNet to solve the classification challenge. And what he has observed is he got much better results than machine learning. He got 10% improvement in error. So the error until then was 26%. What he got was 16.4%. So that is like a very huge leaps and bounds of increase as such. So previously people used to get an improvement like 0.5%, 0.6% and things like that, right? But then After this, he was able to get a 10% improvement. And what happened after that? Everyone left machine learning and jumped onto the band of deep learning. From then onwards, everyone started working and researching on deep learning, and deep learning started beating machine learning on various other fields. So now it is a de facto standard in speech, voice, and images that you are going to use deep learning and not machine learning. So if you see the other things that were present from 2012, right? Until 2012, you had all the machine learning algorithms running, but from 2012, you only had deep learning algorithms. So AlexNet, ZF, VGG, GoogleNet, ResNet, GoogleNet V4, all these are deep learning algorithms. So this is the place where human stands. So we have crossed human level accuracy on ImageNet in 2015. Right? From 2015 onwards, the networks that we have developed have much lesser error than a human. So someone is asking, is it possible to apply DL to tablet data? Yes, it is possible. And it might give good results sometimes as well. So we had a use case in Samsung where I was working. So we had to get the cooling time of an AC machine. AC, that is the AC machine you have in your home or similarly office. We needed to understand if you set a cooling temperature, right? For example, the current temperature is 28 and I said 19. How much time is the time it will take before it goes from 28 to 19? We needed to figure that out using various conditions. The various conditions are like the current temperature, the date, the time, the hour, what are the number of people that are present, and what is the size of the room. So there are various other features. And what we have seen is we have tried out random forest, gradient boosting, and many other algorithms, and then we have applied deep learning. And deep learning beat out all the other algorithms. But it is not always the case. Sometimes you will see that machine learning gives you better results. But yeah, you can apply machine learning or deep learning and see which one is giving you better results. Only problem with deep learning is people feel like deep learning is a black box as such. So that's why they tend to not apply it for tabular data. But you can try it out, and if you are getting better results, you can apply deep learning for tabular data. So for tabular data, there is still not a clear winner as who is perform better, machine learning or deep learning. But for outside tabular data, for sure you can say that deep learning is the best. Again, another more difference of machine learning and deep learning, which is commonly called out in many places. In machine learning, what you do is you need to do feature extraction by yourself and then run an algorithm on top of that one. You know what is feature extraction, right? Creating features. For example, in the tabular data, you have multiple features, right? Those features are created by some person. And we use that to run an algorithm, right? For example, you are supposed to take an image of a car and supposed to tell whether it is a car or not, right? So how do you do that? If you are using machine learning, you need to create images, features for car, saying that is it having a wheel? Is it having multiple wheels? Is it having a window? Or things like that. What are visible in the image, right? Can I find wheels that are present in the image? Can I find doors that are present in the image? Is it having a particular shape? Using all these features, right? You can create a feature matrix and then do classification on top of that one on machine learning. So a person has to sit down and create all these features. All these features, finding out there is a wheel, finding out there is some kind of a shape, does it have a headlight or things like that, right? So a human has to do that, doing out this feature extraction. It was tedious, mainly for computer vision tasks. In tabular data, it makes sense because the features are already available, right? But for things like image or speech, it's not always possible. You need to create features because you just have the data in general. You just have an image. You don't have the features saying this image is having this, right? It's not given to you like that. You are just given the image. So a engineer used to write out feature extractors, which used to extract these features and give to a machine learning model, which can do the task of identifying whether it is a car or not. This is what used to happen before. But after the advent of deep learning, a different thing happened. What happened is now you don't need to do the part of feature extraction. The neural network will do it itself. What you need to the only thing is you need to give the image input to the neural network, and it will figure out what are all the features that it needs to extract by itself and apply the algorithm on top of that one. So again, this part is removed as well. You don't need to have a engineer sit down and do the feature extraction. You just need to give the data to the machine and it will be able to give out the results. So this is the basic difference between a machine learning and deep learning, and that is why it is much more better than machine learning. Why? Because if you are asking a person to find out all the required features, right, he will not be able to get all the good amount of features. But if you are asking a machine to do that, it will be able to look at a lot of data and it will be able to identify what are all the key features that are required to do the particular task. That is why deep learning is better than machine learning in data like this, where the data is not structured like a tabular data, where the data is unstructured like image or speech or text, right, where you don't have features which are already determined. In that cases, deep learning beats machine learning because there is no human element involved. Right? Is this clear? What is the difference between machine learning and deep learning? So is this clear? The feature extraction part and why we don't need to do it for deep learning, right? Okay, yeah. So we will cover some applications of deep learning before we go on to identify what are the key components of a neural network and work on top of that one. We'll try to see what are the applications that are possible in industry with deep learning, which was not possible with machine learning before. So before that, I want to show you an interesting video.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time.
Jordan Peele created this fake video of President Obama to demonstrate how easy it is to put words in someone else's mouth.
Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet.
Not everyone bought it, but the technology behind such frauds is rapidly improving, even as worries increase about their potential for harm. This is your Bloomberg Quick Take on deepfakes. Deepfakes, or realistic-looking fake videos and audio, gained popularity as a means of adding famous actresses into porn scenes. Despite bans on major websites, they remain easy to make and find. They're named for the deep learning artificial intelligence algorithms that make them possible. Input real audio or video of a specific person, the more the better, and the software tries to recognize patterns in speech and movement. Introduce a new element like someone else's face or voice, and a deepfake is born.
It's actually extremely easy to make one of these things. There were just some supposed, breakthroughs from academic researchers who work with this particular kind of machine learning in the past few weeks, which would drastically reduce the amount of video you need actually to create one of these.
Programs like FakeApp, the most popular and widely available for making deep fakes, need dozens of hours of human assistance to create a video that looks like this, rather than this. In August, researchers at Carnegie Mellon revealed software that accurately rendered not just facial features, but changing weather patterns and flowers in bloom. This advance is not yet available to the public. But with increasing capability comes increasing concern.
This is kind of fake news on steroids, potentially. We do not know of a case yet where someone has tried to use this to perpetrate a kind of fraud or an information warfare campaign, or for that matter, to really damage someone's reputation. But it's the danger that everyone is really afraid of.
In a world where fakes are easy to create, authenticity also becomes easier to deny. People caught doing genuinely objectionable things could claim evidence against them is bogus. Fake videos can also be difficult to detect, though researchers around the world and at the US Department of Defense have said they're working on ways to counter them. Deep fakes do, however, have some positive uses. Take Cereproc, a firm that creates digital voices for people who lose theirs from disease.
Speech synthesis is the artificial production of human speech.
There are also applications that could be considered either good or bad. like the many, many deepfakes that exist solely to turn as many movies as possible into Nicolas Cage movies.
Oh, hi, Mark.
So right, yeah, that is deepfakes, and that is the possibility of deep learning, which was not possible before. So if you are observing news, right, previously you had the belief that if it is textual content, we can't believe, someone might have faked it, right? But if it is images or video, you used to believe that it is true, because something which you could see means that it is true. But it is not the case anymore. Now you can do the use case that is mentioned in the video with the help of a neural network. So if you find someone like Modi saying something which might not make sense, right, you can believe that it is not done by himself, it is done by a computer using neural networks, right? So yeah, please don't believe now the news of images and videos also. So we need to be more careful now. We can't be sure that whatever we see is the truth anymore. Okay, that is just to show, get some interest on the field of deep learning. So we'll get started with the basics of from where we can start and what are all the different applications. So the first application would be a classifier sort of, right, a dog versus cat classifier. So you can easily build a classifier by taking a set of images, throw it onto a neural network. You should be able to get results very quickly. So that would be the first basic use case. On top of that one, you can do object detection. So I think everyone is able to see my screen, I guess, where I have this car, bicycle, and traffic light, right? Yeah. So object detection is the task of finding out not only what are all the objects that are present, but also finding out where these objects are present in the image. So previously in the case of image classification, we are only saying these objects are present in the image, but we are not concerned about where that object is present, right? In object detection, we go a bit far and say that, okay, the object is present, that is fine, but I will also going to tell where it is present with the help of a bounding box. By bounding box, what I mean is the rectangle. You could see, right? So there is a car with a yellow bounding box on top of that one. There is a bicycle with a red bounding box on top of that one. There is a person with a pink bounding box on top of that one. So it is going to tell where the object is present to some accuracy using a bounding box. So this is what object detection is. And you might have seen some use cases of this recently as such, right? So there is this corona going on and people wanted to detect whether persons are wearing mask or not, right? So how they were able to do that? They were able to do that with the help of object detection. So they have an algorithm running behind, which is looking at images and saying, okay, this person is there. Once I detect whether the person is there or not using a bounding box, I'll detect whether the person is wearing a mask or not using another bounding box. Using that, I'll be able to tell, okay, this person is having a mask or not, and whether he is safe to enter the area or not. So there are many surveillance use cases that have been coming across in this part. Similarly, there were some social distancing use cases coming as well, like figuring out what are all the persons that are present, and if they are very close to each other, it will throw a red alarm saying that, okay, these people are close within a minute. So there can be a problem of virus transmission. So these are all things that are possible with the help of object detection. And many more other things are possible as well. But again, this is just a flavor. And then image segmentation. In object detection, we are happy with just knowing the bounding box of where the object is present, right? In image segmentation, we even go far and say that we are not just happy knowing where the object is present with the help of bounding box, but I want the exact boundary of the object, right? And that is possible with the help of image segmentation. Again, all these use cases that I am talking about, there is a neural network behind it. Only thing is, they are different kind of neural networks, different kind of neural network for a different task, but all of them are a neural network, and they work on image data or whatever kind of data. So again, image segmentation, it tries to find out the exact boundary of the person. So if you can see, right, the task of the neural network in this case is to find out the exact boundary of all the persons that are involved, right? That is the task of an image segmentation. And why it is tougher than object detection? Because it is supposed to give every pixel a value. You might not be sure what is a pixel, so we'll be talking about it later. But you can think of pixel as an unit in an image. So every unit in an image is supposed to be given a value saying whether it belongs to person or it belongs to background or something else. So that is the task of image segmentation. And the use case of image segmentation are places like if you have used Google Portrait mode, right? There you might have seen that it allows you to blur out your background and only keep yourself clear when you're taking a picture. And how is that possible? It is possible because it can figure out what is your background. I mean, what is your boundary and separate it from the background so that it can blur out all the background and only keep you on focus. That is possible with the help of image segmentation happening on the camera real time. That is happening in Samsung as well. It is called bokeh effect, and in Google it's the portrait mode. Similarly, in Zoom, you might have seen the virtual backgrounds, right? Where you can change your background and have another, you can make it look like you are sitting in another place. And how is that possible? That is possible due to the neural network. It can figure out your boundary, and it can remove the background and keep another background so that it will make you look like you are sitting in a different place. Yeah, so in DSLR camera also it is showing a rectangle and showing some pixels in it. Exactly. So when you are pointing a camera towards a person, right, it might be showing boxes around face or things like that, right? So how does it do? It is doing it with the help of object detection. So there might be a neural network, or there might be a simpler thing than a neural network, because face detection is a little bit easier than other use cases. So there would be some algorithm that does this task, but neural networks are the best at it. But I don't know if cameras are using neural networks because I don't know whether they have that much amount of compute power. But I think since all the devices have been increasing their compute power over the days, right? So I think it is completely possible that there might be a neural network on top of camera as well. Face detection, if you are using an iPhone, you could see that you can unlock your phone using your face. Or similarly, you have seen many face detection use cases, right? In China, everything happens with face. If you are going to buy anything, you need to show your face and you can send money across. Or if you have done something wrong, right, on the road or something like that, government will figure out using your face, okay, this person has done wrong, and immediately your score will be reduced. You'll be having a score similar to credit score, what you have here, right? So there is a score there, which will reduce your point saying that, okay, this person has done a fault. Unlike what happens here. Here, a police needs to catch you and give you a fine and things like that, right? There, everything is automated. There are computers are watching you always and figuring out if you are doing anything not proper, violating the rules, and immediately you'll be fined for that. And then you have apps like Prisma. So I think people might have used Prisma. If not, Prisma is, it takes a picture of you and it will make it look like a painting. It came somewhere around 5 years ago. And it was very popular then. People started posting pictures of themselves looking like paintings online. And this was possible because of a neural network. So what it used to happen is it took an image and it used to send to the server. And then the server, it used to make it look like a painting. And then you could get it back onto your mobile. So this was happening due to deep learning. Someone was mentioning this person does not exist.com. So it is similar to this. All the humans that you are seeing here, right? These are all not real humans. These are all imagined by a computer. Again, before telling how this is possible, one thing we need to understand is until few years ago, people used to think that neural networks can do computational tasks. They can do things like solving numbers, doing the classification task, object detection task, and things like that. But they never felt like computers can be artistic. They can create art or they can imagine just like humans can imagine, right? Nobody thought that. But then with the advent of GANs, that is the generative adversarial neural networks, and similarly other generative networks, what is observed is you don't need to, the computer can do as much good as what you can do. So if you are able to create a painting, computer can create a painting as well. If you can create a music which is beautiful, computer can do that as well. So anything you feel like you are able to do, the computer is able to do now. So the gap between a human and machines are reducing as such. So previously we used to think that we are good at least in few areas compared to computers, but now computers are catching up in other areas as well, especially in the areas of creativity. So these are all the faces of the people who are not present in real world. These were created and imagined by a computer. That is a neural network. This is a deepfake we saw just a few minutes ago. And then speech recognition. So when you're talking to Alexa or something like that, right? So how does it understand what you are speaking? That is because it has a neural network inside it. So it sees what is the sound that is coming from your mouth, figures out what are the words that are relevant to it, understands it, and tries to give out the result in the form of a speech again. So all this is possible due to a neural network which is there, and it could understand what you are speaking. And it could tell Alexa, okay, you are supposed to do this. Right? So speech recognition use case also, you need neural networks. And similarly, if you are dealing with text data also, you need neural networks. That is the NLP part. We have seen that previously we used machine learning to solve the NLP task of sentiment analysis, right? Instead of using something like a random forest or something like that, we can use a neural network to do the same task. And we'll see that it generally gets better with using a deep learning for an NLP task. So this is the basic applications involved. So there are many other applications. So can someone tell what are the applications that you think are possible with neural networks that is not discussed here? Yeah. Facebook photo tagging suggestions. Exactly. If you are creating a photo, right, it will suggest that, okay, these are all the people that may be present. Do you want to tag them? And how that is possible? That is possible due to it understanding the faces of all your friends. Iris recognition comes under, yes, iris recognition. You can do it with this if it is not even images, but if it is images, you can do it with deep learning as well. But again, iris recognition, okay, iris recognition is that, right? I was thinking, no. Yeah, iris recognition is you are saying the iris in the eye, identifying whether, like just like face recognition, you can do iris recognition. Yes, exactly, you can do that. Someone has mentioned FaceApp. Yes, FaceApp is something again possible due to a neural network. You have observed many people uploading photos of their old age in Facebook, or maybe you might have seen celebrities being old, although they are not old, right? And how is that possible? That is possible due to a neural network sitting back and imagining how that celebrity or you are going to look like in maybe 30 years of time. That is possible due to deep learning. OCR, exactly. OCR works. So understanding what is the information that is present in your documents, right? That happens due to deep learning. And that is a very useful use case in many industries. OCR is kind of like considered common now. Google Photos, search by place, person, other keywords, all these things. Yes, exactly. So the same kind of thing we developed on Samsung as well. So if you want to search anything, right, for photos in your gallery, you are able to do that because the phone can understand what are all the things that are present in an image. Word transformation, probably more than word transformation, you can say it's sentence translation or something like that. So for example, if you want to convert English to Hindi, right, you can do that with the help of deep learning. So you might have seen Google Translate. How it works is it has a neural network sitting behind it and trying to do this task of translation. Snapchat filters, exactly. Snapchat filters work like this. They try to figure out your face parts or other things related, and it can keep glasses on top of you, or it can make you old or things like that. Insta filters, yeah, Insta filters should be using neural networks as well. Google Lens as well. Yeah, Google Lens can identify what are all the objects that are present, and it can give you relevant results on top of that one. Google Lens can do that. And again, the same thing is being done by Samsung as well. We have developed a product on top of that one. There is something called Bixby Lens. Bixby Lens does the same thing. If you point the Bixby Lens to something, right, it can identify what are all the objects that are present, and it can give you relevant results saying that if you want to buy that thing or probably want to learn more about thing, if it is a movie poster, what is that movie and things like that. All these things are possible because it can understand what is present behind it. Yeah, thanks. So these are a lot of very cool applications, and these all things are possible due to neural networks. So now you should understand like how neural networks are very interesting compared to machine learning, because machine learning, yeah, we know it can work on tabular data and do predictions, right? But deep learning, you can use it on use cases which you can look at and see, okay, this is happening, sort of, right? Because it works on image data and speech data. So a lot of the machines, the way they interact with you is being changed because of the deep learning. So next we'll get started with neural network and biological intuitions. But before that, we'll take a 5 minutes break. You can drink some water or come back in 5 minutes. Okay, so let's get started back. So far, we have seen the different applications of neural networks, that is deep learning. Now we will try to understand what is a neural network and how does it look like and why it is inspired from, where it is inspired from. So people have tried to understand brain from a long time. They have been trying to do various experiments and to understand what is the brain and how it is working as such. So brain is the most complicated thing so far in the universe, and still people were not able to figure out how the brain works internally. But there were some improvements. So we had got some enough amount of information over the years, although many things are still hidden. So brain consists of neurons and dendrites and then axons. This is the basic structure of a biological neuron. So people try to get inspired from that and try to replicate it to a machine and create a neural network, an artificial neural network, which kind of behaves like a real neural network. So people understand how a neuron gets fired in the brain when you are doing a task, right? So when you are doing a task, what happens is you are sending information through your eye, you are sending a lot of images, or similarly through your ear, you are sending a lot of voice and various other information you are sending to the brain. Brain uses all this information to figure out the important thing and what to do on top of that one, right? So the task of a real neural network is this. We are trying to replicate that in the case of an artificial neural network. Again, artificial neural network consists of taking an input from input layer and then pass it across to the output layer, which is passed across to other neurons. So the same thing happens in brain as well. One neuron takes the information, processes it, and gives it across to other neurons, which continue. So a set of neurons get fired upon when looking at the information. And when this happens, at the final layer, you'll be getting some output, which will be useful for doing a particular task. So this is the basic structure of a neural network. A neural network contains two important components, neurons or nodes and weights. So it will look like this. A neural network will look like this. All the brown things that you find, right? Those are nothing but the nodes of a neural network. And all the lines that are drawn between different nodes that you can observe, right? It is the weights, right? So these are the two different important components that are present in a neural network, nodes and weights. The brown circles that you see are the nodes or the neurons, which is the basic structure of a neural network. Neuron is the computational unit of a neural network. And the different lines that are used for connecting different neurons, right? That is the weights. Weights indicate the strength of the connection between multiple neurons. So they are used to see which neuron is connected to which other neuron. As like we saw in the case of a real brain, right? Multiple neurons are connected to each other and those neurons fire the other neurons that are coming afterwards. And this process continues until you get an output. Same thing happens in the case of a neural network, artificial neural network as well. You have some neurons which get fired, which go on and fire some other neurons, and this process continues until you get an output. So these are the two basic components of a neural network, neuron and weights. So we'll see how an image is provided as an input to the neural network. So can someone tell what is an image? Do you know what is an image and what are the structural components of an image? Does anyone have an idea of, yeah, combination of RGB? Those are the three channels. But what do you think is an image? Like how do you represent an image to a computer? How does a computer see your image? How do you store an image in a computer? Right? So how do you do that? Again, how we do that is with the help of numbers. Yes, matrix of pixels. So pixel is the basic unit of a image, which carries a value, that is the intensity value. So again, if you click on an image and click on the properties, right, you will get information like what is the resolution of the image. You might have heard about, right? Or something like that. 300 is the width and 600 is the height, something like that. When you click on an image, you might be getting that kind of information. So what does it represent? It represents that it is a matrix of 300 rows and 600 columns. And every number in that is called a pixel. So this is how you represent an image. You represent an image using a matrix. Everyone knows a matrix, I guess. A matrix is nothing but a, you can say, a 2D list of numbers, right? So an image is represented like a matrix to a computer. If it is a black and white image, it is a 2D matrix. If it is an RGB image, it is a 3D matrix. By 3D matrix, what I mean? It will not have 2 dimensions. It will be having 3 dimensions. So You can think of it like having multiple 2D matrices. That is how you represent an image. Image is represented by a 2D matrix, and every number in that matrix is called a pixel, which is having a value which is called intensity. The intensity of that pixel is going to vary between 0 to 255 because it is a digital image, right? So you want to represent with only 8 bits. So it is going to stay between 0 to 255. Every pixel value is going to stay between 0 to 255. Right? So this could be an image. Whatever I have posted in chat box, that it could be an image. It is a 2x2 image. It has 4 pixel values: 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we saw, like as we have observed, it is between 0 to 255. Right? This is a 2x2 image. And it is a 2D image because only we don't have third dimension. If we have third dimension, it will be stretched across the third dimension. So currently you can think of it like a black and white image. So whatever the data set that we'll be working on is called as the MNIST data set. So MNIST is a set of handwritten digits which look like this. So you could see this 3, right? So 3 is a handwritten digit by someone. So someone, what they have done is they have handwritten digits of 60,000. They have created a data set of 60,000 images for digits 0 to 9. And this data set is called MNIST data set. So that every image in this data set has a resolution of 28 cross 28. So it has 28 width and 28 height. So it has total 28 into 28, 784 pixels. And it is a black and white image. It is a black and white image means we don't have color dimension on top of that one. Right? So this is the data set we are going to deal with. The data set has 10 output classes. The output classes are between 0 to 9. We are going to deal with this data set. And the task of the neural network that we are going to design first is to look at this image and try to figure out what is the digit. So when I give my handwritten digit to it, right, it should be able to see and understand that, okay, this number is a 3 and not 2 or anything. Right? So this is the task of a neural network. We'll see how to provide input, because again, it is an image, right? It is just a pixel. I mean, it is a group of pixels. So how do we provide this group of pixels as an input to neural network? We'll see that. But before that, we need to understand that the task of this neural network is to look at an image and to give an output between 0 to 9. It is supposed to give a number between 0 to 9, saying that, okay, if this is digit 3, it should give a value 3. And also, the digits can be any way. Like it can be slightly tilted to the left, slightly tilted to the right. Because you know, right, when you write a digit, you will not always write it in the same way. It will be changed slightly. And even if the data is changed slightly, it should still point it out to 3. It should not give a random result. So that means the neural network should understand the structure of a 3. It should not just remember, okay, if these pixel values are there, it is a 3, right? It should not do that. It should understand how a 3 should be written. Just like how a human should understand what a 3 should be written like. If it is able to do that, if you write 3 in any way, it should be able to figure out that it is a 3. So the task of a neural network is cut out. It needs to regularize and understand how a 3 needs to look like. And similarly, if you are given another digit saying 8, it should be able to figure out that this is not 3 and it is some other digit, which is 8. So this is the task of the neural network that we are going to design. Right? Is this clear? The data set, what we are going to deal with. So this is the MNIST data set, where you have digits between 0 to 9, handwritten digits that are created by some famous person. We'll be using it for our use case. Like again, we have said, we need to provide this image input to our neural network. But how do we provide that? We provide it by converting a 2D image into a 1D vector. So how do we do that? I'll give an example of how you can do that. So say I have a matrix like this, right? I want to convert into a 1D vector. So how do I do that? I take every row and write it one after the other. So I'll take the first row I see what are the values. I write it 1, 2. Then I see what is the next row. I write it the values again. I get it 184. So this is how I converted 2D vector into 1D vector. Right? Again, if we see another example. If you have a 2D vector like this, right? 2D input, that is the image like this, which is a 3 cross 3 2D vector. Right? So how do you convert it into 1D? What is the output you will get if you convert into 1D? We saw that we'll try to write down the rows one by one continuously, right? So can someone tell what would be the result that you would get if you convert it to 1D? Yes, exactly. You will get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That is how we converted a 2D image into a 1D vector. Right? So same thing we will do with MNIST dataset as well. Just like how we converted a 3 cross 3 vector to a 1D vector, we can convert a 28 cross 28 image to a 1D vector as well. So we'll be getting a 784 sized 1D vector. So I can take this image of 28 cross 28. We know that it will be having 784 values. And I create a 784 1D vector, which I can pass as input to the neural network. Right? So this is how a image looks like. So these values are all normalized between 0 to 1, but we know that all the pixel values stay between 0 to 255, right? So what they have done is they have divided every pixel value by 255. So if you do that, you can normalize it to stay between 0 to 1. You might have already heard about normalization in machine learning, right? You can normalize input data to stay between 0 to 1 and things like that, right? Same thing is happening here. We know that the maximum value is 255. So every pixel value is divided by 255. You will be getting a matrix like this. So this is a 28 cross 28 matrix. Everyone is able to see the 28 cross 28 matrix, right? Yeah, so you can see that some values are higher, 1 and all, but many of the other values are 0. So wherever you have information present, that is wherever you have digit present, you will be having a value, higher value, something like 0.8 or 0.9 or 1.0. Other all will be 0 or very less, like 0.1 and 0.2. So that is how we represent an image. If you give this matrix, the task of the neural network is to look at this matrix and convert it into digit 3. As we know, a neuron is the basic unit of a neural network, right? The task of a neuron is to carry a value between 0 to 1. That is the only task. It is supposed to carry a value between 0 to 1. Neuron is nothing but a thing that holds a number. It carries a value between 0 to 1. If the value is closer to 1, it means that it is activated. If the value is closer to 0, it means that it is deactivated. So higher the value, higher the activation. Right? So what does activation mean? Activation means that the neuron is highlighted, so it can pass on the information to the other set of neurons that are nearby. If it is not highlighted, if it is not activated, it will not be part of the computational task. So that is what activation means for a neuron. So as you could see, 0.58 means it is mildly activated, but if it is 1.00, it means that fully activated. 0.20, almost not activated. So weights are the strength of connections between different neurons in a neural network. What we are dealing with is called a fully connected neural network. In a fully connected neural network, you have a connection between every neuron in previous layer and a neuron in this current layer. So if you see here, we have multiple layers, right? You have an input layer, you have an output layer, and you have a set of hidden layers. How do you determine the input layer? The input layer is determined the size of your input. What is the size of our input? We know that we have converted a 2D image into a 1D vector. Our 2D image is 28 cross 28. So we'll be getting a 1D vector of size 784, right? We are sending it across using 784 values. So you will be having 784 nodes here. Like we have seen, we have 784 values between 0 to 1, if you remember, in input, right? We are passing it as part of the input layer here. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, so on till 784 nodes at the input, each carrying a value between 0 to 1. That is the pixel value that is mentioned there, right? So this is how the input layer is determined. And how is the output layer determined? Output layer is determined the number of classes in your data set. So in our use case, how many classes are there? So there are 10 classes. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you have values between 0 and 9, right? So 10 classes are there. So that's why you'll be having 10 nodes in your output layer. And then whatever is left between, right? So that is the hidden layer. And how do you determine the hidden layer? You determine the hidden layer through random experimentation. You'll try to see how many layers to keep or how many nodes to keep in a hidden layer through random experimentation and see which one is giving the better results. Based on that, you figure out what is the hidden layer. The input layer and output layer are fixed, but hidden layers are the hyperparameters that you need to tune as part of your training process. Right? Is this clear? The entire structure of a neural network? So I hope this part is clear. Like how do you determine the input layer and how do you determine the output layer, right? Yeah. How do you determine the output layer? You determine the output layer by determining what are the number of classes that are present in your dataset. So how many classes are present in my dataset? I have 10 classes in my dataset. Between 0 to 9. The output of my, since it is the handwritten digits of numbers between 0 to 9, right? So I will have only 10 outputs possible. So I'll be having 10 nodes in the output layer. Right? Is that clear? How do you determine the number of nodes in the output layer? Why can't we send the 28 cross 28 matrix instead of converting it to a 1D matrix? That is because the structure of neural network behaves like that. It can't directly deal with a 2D image. It only deals with a 1D image. And that is a very good point to ask. Why do we not do that? Because the neural network can't deal with that. That is why we don't do that. But we will see that we will be doing it as part of CNN, which we'll be covering in probably 2 places later. And we will see that it performs better than whatever we are discussing so far. But again, this is the basic structure of neural network. So that's why we are starting with here. But we'll see that we'll try to improve on top of this one and we'll try to give a convolutional neural network. So for an artificial neural network, you need to give 1D matrix. But if you are going for a convolutional neural network, we'll see that we'll be passing the 2D matrix directly. Yes, and it needs more processing power because you are having connections between every neuron to every other neuron, right? So you will see that you will be having a lot of weights. And since you are having a lot of weights and all those things, so it will be more computationally complex and it will take a lot of time also to train, sort of. That is why it is not very efficient as such. But again, this is where neural network started. So that's why we are reading this. But then we'll try to improve on top of this one and try to understand how we can do a better understanding of the data at lower computational power and give better results using other kinds of neural networks. So again, in the hidden layer also, you have multiple layers. You have multiple hidden layers. It is a number which you need to decide. You need to experiment and see which one is giving you better results. So you can try out different kinds of hidden layers and different kinds of configurations and see which one is giving you better results. So I can keep 2 hidden layers, 3 hidden layers, or any number of hidden layers. And similarly, in every hidden layer, right, the number of nodes need not be consistent as well. It can be 5, it can be 10, it can be 20, and it need not be same across every other hidden layer as well. So I can keep 5 hidden nodes in the first hidden layer, I can keep 10 hidden nodes in the second hidden layer, and I can keep 20 hidden nodes in the third layer. So I can do this, and I should be okay with that. So this is how the entire structure of a neural network looks like. You have neurons and you have weights, and you pass the input by converting it to a 1D vector, which is transmitted across. We'll see how it is transmitted across using the computation. We'll talk about the computation part, but this is the basic structure for neural network. I hope this part is clear, right? Is this clear? What is the basic structure of a neural network? Okay. So we'll go forward and see how we can pass the input to the next layers. Yeah. So this is the basic structure for neural network. You have a node which is connected to every other node in the previous layer. We saw that it is a fully connected neural network. By a fully connected neural network, what do we mean? We mean that every node in this layer is connected to every other node in the previous layer. So if you could see, right, this node H1 is having connections from itself to all the nodes in the previous layer. It is a fully connected neural network. It's not like partially connected, only few nodes it is connected. It is connected to every other node in the previous layer, right? So once we have that, we can pass the information from input layer to the next layer. We will determine how to do that. We do that using this formula. You have the input node values, which are already determined. We saw that these values are determined from the image itself. They carry value between 0 to 1, right? Once you have this, you have the weights that are connecting these nodes to the node in the next layer. Once that is there, you can calculate what is the value at this node using the previous node values and similarly the weights, right? We do this by doing a multiplication of a node with the weight and submitting it across for all the nodes. So we'll do like x1 at w1 plus x2 into w2 plus so on till xn into wn. We submit across whatever the value you get, right? That is the value at the new node. So that is how you take the input from the previous node and multiply it with the weights, and you'll be getting a value in the network, right? On top of that one, you have another variable called bias. So this bias variable is present across every node in the network. So you see there are multiple nodes, right? At every node that is present, you ignore the input layer and output layer, but at every other node in the network, you have a variable called a bias. So you take the inputs from previous, multiply it with the weights, and then add bias of that node. What are the output you get? You will get, right? That is called the output of that neural network. So output of that node. So yeah, someone asked what is weight? Weight is the strength of connection between the previous node and this node. So we know that weight connects nodes from previous layer to the current layer, right? And what does weight determine? It determines how much strength the connection has. So if the strength is high, it will pass on more information. If the strength is less, it will pass less information. So that is what a weight does. And how these weights are determined, we have only talked about how these node values are determined. I mean, input node values are determined. But weights we have not talked about. How these weights are determined? Yes, the weights are determined by the algorithm. So initially you will be having random weights, just like in the case of any algorithm, like say you are having linear regression or anything, right? There also you'll be having this concept of weights, if you remember, right? Those weights are set to random values at the beginning, but over the over the course of training, these values get updated and become better, such that the accuracy of the model increases. So the same thing that happens in the case of linear regression or logistic regression happens here as well. So this kind of is similar to logistic regression formula, if you remember, right? So logistic regression is also y equals to mx plus c sort of thing, right? If you remember. So this is also kind of same like that. Logistic regression only. You are having weights, you are multiplying with inputs, and then you are having a bias on top of that one. logistic regression equation was also kind of similar, if you remember, right? So if you take one node and compare it to logistic regression, both of them kind of look similar. So it runs it many times over again to find the weights. Yes, exactly. So in linear regression or logistic regression, you have a convergence point. But in the case of neural network, the convergence is not easy. So it will take a lot of time. So it will run it over and over until you find out what are the exact weights. But this is how you calculate the value of a hidden layer node. We know the values of the input nodes are already determined. Those are the values that we are getting in from the image itself. But if you want to determine what is the value of a hidden layer node, right? How do you do that? You do it this way. You take out all the input nodes, find out the weights, multiply them and sum it up and add bias on top of that one. You'll be getting the value of the hidden layer. Again, these weights and bias are the hyperparameters which we will learn over the course of training, right? This is how you do it for the first hidden layer. You take the inputs from the previous layer, calculate the weights, you use the weights and then calculate the values and add bias on top of that one. You'll get for first hidden node. Similarly, you do it for second hidden node, all the hidden nodes in the first layer. Once you do that, you have determined all the values of the nodes in the first hidden layer. You can repeat the process. You can go to the next hidden layer and use the weights between the first hidden layer and second hidden layer to compute the values of second hidden layer. And you continue this process until you reach the output. Right? Is this clear how you are calculating the values? Is this part clear? How you are doing the value calculation from the input to the output? You're taking the input at every layer and multiplying the weights to get the outputs of the next layer. And you continue this process until you reach the output. You start from the input layer and you go on proceeding until you reach the output layer. And we know that every node carries a value between 0 to 1. We saw that a neuron carries a value between 0 to 1. So even when you reach the output, right, you'll be having all the 10 output nodes carrying a value between 0 to 1. Which one is carrying the highest value will be the one which is the output that our neural network will tell. This is clear, the entire part. I hope this part is clear, right? Great. So far we have discussed how you pass input from one layer to other layer, right? But there is something which is missing. What is missing? If you just pass it across like this, right? You are not giving it, the neural network, a lot of capability. Why you are not giving the lot of capability? Because you are only doing a linear transformation. You are multiplying with weights and adding bias and go again like multiplying with weights and adding bias. What you are doing is you are doing a linear transformation. This is similar to your linear regression or logistic regression. It doesn't have much capability. Not logistic regression. You can think of this similar to your linear regression, right? If that is the case, the capability of the neural network is less because it doesn't capture the nonlinear relation between output and input. The ideal task of a neural network is just to map input to output, right? You are given some input and you are supposed to tell what is the output. This is what a neural network does. So it is like you are trying to find out what is the function that can map input to output. But the problem is, if you are just doing it in the way that we have discussed so far, it is just a linear mapping. What we are saying is output is dependent on a linear way on input. That is, it is supposed to be like y equals to mx plus c only. We are not going to have nonlinear component like y equals to x square or x cube or maybe e power x or something like that. We are not doing that. We are only using y equals to mx plus c sort of kind of thing. And that limits the capability of a neural network. If you are only having a linear relation between input and output, right? Because in real world, what you will see that you will not have a linear relation between input and output. You will be having a much complex relation. So how do you deal with that? You deal with that by introducing non-linearity into your neural network. You give that capability to the neural network. And how do you do that? You do it with the help of an activation function, like Shiv has mentioned. Right? So if someone asks you what is the role of an activation function in neural network, you're supposed to tell it is used to introduce non-linearity so that you can increase its capacity to do a complex task. to model the non-linearity between output and input. That is what an activation function is, right? So activation function is a very simple function. There are multiple activation functions. We'll be talking about few of them. So the old and the most popular previously is sigmoid activation function. So you give it any value, it will shrink it to value between 0 to 1, right? So we saw that a node is supposed to carry a value between 0 to 1 previously, right? And how it is possible? It is possible because after you get the value, after doing this sort of sigma xi wi plus b, right? What is the value that you are getting? You pass it through the activation function. It keeps it between 0 to 1. Whatever value you get, you pass it through the activation function. It keeps it between 0 to 1. That is the task of sigmoid. But again, this is the simple notation. That's why we are trying to say. But again, you need not feel like a neuron is supposed to carry a value between 0 to 1. It does so only if you are using sigmoid activation function. If you use different activation function, it can carry different kind of values as well. If you are using sigmoid, we saw that it can take a value from the neuron and shrink it to a value between 0 to 1. If you are using tanh, it can shrink it to a value between -1 to 1. If you are using ReLU, what it will do is it will remove all the negative values and only keep the positive values, max of 0, x. So if your input is positive, it will keep. If your input is negative, you will be getting a 0. So these are the different activation functions, right? Is this part clear? What is an activation function? Okay, sure. Yeah. So why do we have to use activation function? We have to use activation function because if we are not using activation function, right, you will be having a relation of output and input like this, y equals to mx plus c, right? You will be having an output like this. You will be having a relation like this. What is the relation? It is a linear relation. X is the input, y is the output, and m is the parameter you can think of, and c is the bias sort of, right? So that is a linear regression kind of thing. We know that linear regression is not always capable of modeling the complexity of relation between output and input, right? You might have seen this. Because of that, you might have gone for something like a polynomial regression or something like that. I don't know if you have heard about it, but yeah, polynomial regression or other complex kind of algorithms are possible because they were able to find out what are the nonlinear relationships that are present between output and input. But we saw that we are only doing something like a y equals to mx plus c from the formula that you have seen before, right? This is the neural network formula, y equals to wx plus b, right? If you directly use this, you only get a linear relationship between output and input. But if you are having a linear relationship between an output and input, that means that the capability of the network is limited. It can only do few tasks where the relationship is linear. If the relationship is non-linear, it will not be able to do a justice to the task. It will be giving suboptimal results, right? All the other algorithms that you have seen, right, apart from linear regression, all of them are non-linear, like the decision decision tree, random forest, all other algorithms, right? All of them are non-linear. They don't have a direct linear relationship between input and output. Similarly, we don't want our neural network to be like that as well. We don't want it to be having a linear relationship between output and input. So how do we deal with this? We try to deal with this by keeping a non-linear element somewhere. And what is this non-linear element? This non-linear element is the activation function. The activation function, the task of an activation function is it takes a value and it converts into another value. It can be anything. And there are multiple, but what it does is it takes an input and applies a non-linear function on top of that one, and it will give another output. So we'll see what are those non-linear functions. So the first non-linear function is sigmoid activation function. What does sigmoid do? It takes input x and it will give output 1 by 1 plus e power minus x. You can see e power is there means it is non-linear, right? So previously y equals to mx plus c will become y equals to m by 1 plus e power minus x c. So immediately we see that there is a non-linearity introduced, right? And what is the property of this? So if you pass any x here, right, in this sigmoid activation function, sigma of x, any x you pass, it will shrink it to a value between 0 to 1. That is the property of this activation function, 1 by 1 plus e power minus x, right? Any value you give, it will shrink it between 0 to 1. That is what sigmoid does. And it is present at every node. So we know that how we can calculate the value at a particular node. We do it by using previous nodes, multiplying it with weights, and then add bias on top of that one. Once you get the value right, you pass with an activation function at that node. And when you pass that, you'll be getting a nonlinear value. And you pass this nonlinear value to the next layer. You don't pass the previous value, whatever you got, just by summing it up. You don't pass it directly. You pass it through an activation function. You see what is the value, and you pass this value to the next layer. That is the next hidden layer. You continue this process. That is why every node has an activation function. Every node that has a value, it passes through an activation function, and the value that is coming from the activation function is passed on to the next layer. Is this part clear? How the activation function works? So yeah, we need to use activation function for nonlinear data. But what you will observe is most of the data is nonlinear. There is no linear data as such. Image, right? Image is not linear. It is nonlinear. So most of the data that we deal with is nonlinear. So we need to use activation function. And there are multiple activation functions. Like there are multiple algorithms in machine learning, right? There are multiple activation functions which you can use, and they have different properties. So sigmoid keeps a value between 0 to 1. Like so far we have discussed, right? A neuron is supposed to carry a value between 0 to 1. That is possible when it is using a sigmoid activation function. Not always. If it is using a sigmoid activation function, the value gets shrink between 0 to 1. But if it is using a tanh activation function, right? The value will be constrained between -1 to 1. And if it is using a ReLU activation function, what it will do is it will remove all the negative values and it will only keep the positive values. Max of 0 to x. So if you give -5, right, you will get 0. But if you are giving +5, you will get 5. This is a ReLU activation function. So these are the most popular activation functions. There are others also, but those are not much popular as such. Right? Is this clear? How about others? Is this part clear to everyone? Cool. So this is a question that most of the people might ask when you go to interview at the beginning. They'll ask like, why do you need an activation function? What does it do? You are supposed to tell that you are using it to give the neural network a capability to model nonlinear functions. You are using it to introduce nonlinearity into your neural network. That's why you use an activation function, right? So far we have seen the activation functions that are present at the hidden layer. At the output layer also you have an activation function that is called the softmax activation function. It is different from the activation functions that we have discussed so far. The activation functions that we have discussed so far, right, they are applicable only for the hidden layers. There is another activation function which is applicable for the output layer. That is called as softmax activation function. What softmax does is, it works not on a single node, but it will take all the outputs from the output layer and it will map to a different set of values. So if you are having 3 output nodes, right, and having values 2, 1, 0.1, if you pass it through a softmax, you will be getting 3 different outputs, which are like 0.7, 0.2, 0.1. So can you see something in the output? 0.7, 0.2, 0.1. Can you feel something like, what does it represent as such? If you add all these values, right, what do you get? You're getting 1, right? So if you are adding anything and you're getting 1, what does it mean? It means it is kind of similar to probability, right? So softmax does that. What softmax does is, it will try to give the outputs in such a way that all of them look like probabilities. And why does it do that? That is because if I'm having outputs like this, right, it doesn't make any sense. What does I understand from that? I'm having output node 1 having value 2, output node 2 having value 1, and output node 3 having 0.1. I can't say that, okay, this is 70% cat, 30% dog, 0% elephant or something like that. That is not possible before. But if I pass it through a softmax function, right, it will give me probabilities. Now I can say, okay, if my data set is containing cat, dog, and elephant, then probably this image is with 70% probability, there is a cat in this. With 20% probability, there is a dog in this, and probably with 10% probability, there is an elephant in this. Right? So this is what softmax activation function does. And it is present only at the output layer. And it is used to push the probabilities, push the values at the output layer, such that if you sum up all of them, right, you'll be getting value 1. And what you do using these probabilities, you will see which one is having the highest amount of probability. That is the output class. So in this case, if I'm having 3 nodes, I'm getting values between 0.7, 0.2, and 0.1. 0.7 is the highest value, right? So what does it mean? That means that it is class 1. That means the output is class 1 because it is the highest value. Right? So yeah, does everyone understand what is softmax doing? So yeah, can someone tell why do we use softmax and not other activation functions in the output layer? So why do you feel we use softmax function and not other activation functions? So would the other activation functions not give probabilities? They would not give. They would give some values which are constrained. Every value will be constrained to some value, but it will not be like if you sum up all the outputs, right, you will be getting 1. So that is why you use softmax. Exactly. Like everyone is saying, softmax is used to give us output in the form that it will look like a probability which is easy to interpret. Exactly. I guess everyone is aware of this loss function, cross entropy loss. Do you? You have used it for logistic regression, right? Does everyone remember this loss function, cross entropy? Can someone tell me what is the loss function? So you might have used loss function as such in various use cases if you remember, right? In various algorithms, every algorithm will have a loss function which is used. Okay. Does anyone remember what is the loss function? Not cross entropy, but what is just a loss function? We'll discuss what is cross entropy later. But before that, we would want to know what is a loss function at all. Exactly. The task of loss function is to determine how much we are different from the expected output, how much error there is. And why is it used? It is used to change our weights in such a way that we'll be giving better results the next time. Based on the loss, right? We'll try to change the weights in such a way that we'll be getting better results the next time. Right? So that is what a loss function is. Loss function is you propagate all the input to the output, and once you reach the output, you compare it to the expected output. You see how much is the difference. Once you find out what is the difference, you represent it, and that is called the loss. And the function you use to find out what is the difference between expected output and the given output, right? That is the loss function. So the loss function, you might have seen multiple loss functions like mean square error or cross entropy or different kinds of other loss functions, right? So that is the task of a loss function. Yes, and loss function is used to minimize the errors. You will use it to reduce the errors and improve your weights. So we'll be using a cross entropy loss function. We know that mean square error and things like that are used for regression. But when you are doing classification, you will be using a cross entropy loss. So this is an important question which can be asked as well. So someone might ask, what is a cross entropy loss, or like where it is used for? So you should be able to tell that cross entropy is for classification and not regression. So the formula of cross entropy is this, minus P log P sigma. So if you remember, right, if you have two probabilities, you can find out what is the cross entropy using this formula, minus P log P sigma. So if you are having three values here, right, and that, so let's say I have only three outputs and the values that I'm getting are 0.1, 0.7 and 0.2, but the labels are 0, 1 and 0. This is the expected output. This is the output I got. If I want to find out what is the loss, I'll use this formula, minus expected output log of my output minus P log P. So every value I'll take, so minus 0 log 0.1 plus 1 log 0.7 plus 0 log 0.2. If I add it up and I find out what is the loss rate, that is the cross entropy loss. That's how you determine the cross entropy loss. Is this part clear? How do you determine the cross entropy loss? You would have already observed it in the case of logistic regression. Same thing is used in the case of logistic regression as well. Right? Cool. We will use this and we will be figuring out what is the error. So is everyone aware of gradient descent? You might have heard about gradient descent during logistic regression, right? Yeah. So same thing will be used for training our neural network as well. So everyone is aware of gradient descent. I guess what gradient descent is, it tries to figure out what is the direction you need to move based on the error you got, and you try to move in that direction to try to reduce your loss. Right? That is what gradient descent is. So same thing is used in the case of neural networks. You might have used gradient descent for figuring out how to do linear regression or logistic regression. We try to use the same thing, the same algorithm of gradient descent for figuring out how do you want to do for a neural network. So the task of a gradient descent is to start with random weights and try to see how you can update the weights in an incremental way over a period of time using the direction, that is the gradient that you have gotten based on the error, and try to change the weights so that you will try to reduce the loss or minimize the loss, right? So that is the task of gradient descent. Right? Is this part clear? Yeah, so there are other techniques also like gradient descent for minimizing loss. So there are techniques like Newton's Rhapsody method and similarly other methods. All of them are iterative methods. Like you try to reduce the loss not at a one time, but over a period of steps, right? So all these are iterative loss reduction optimization techniques. So you might have heard about convex optimization techniques. So gradient descent is the most popular one, but there are other techniques as well. Newton Rhapsody or similarly other something like that. Okay, so we are almost near the end of the class. So if you have any doubts, we can discuss with regards to the class. We have discussed a lot of things today, right? So feel free to ask about anything related to the class. Let's have a Q&A for around 10 minutes. I shared the content of the last class. So it is already available in Google Drive. You should be able to access it. I'll be sharing the content of today's class as well. So I'm not plotting anything. I took a GIF and I placed it here. So I'm not plotting as such myself. But you should be able to do it using MATLAB or something. I mean, similarly in Python also you should be able to do it. It is fine. But again, we are not going to do a plot of something like this. It's just to show demonstration of how gradient descent is going to work. Gradient descent is like keeping a ball on a hill and seeing that it will converge to a minimum somewhere, right? So just like how this ball is kept on a mat and it will be converging over a period of time to a point, right? So gradient descent is the same thing. To just illustrate this, I have taken this picture. So someone is asking, in DL also we need to clean our data. It depends upon the data. In images, right, there is nothing like cleaning. What you will do, it is just an image, right? You will directly give. So you don't do cleaning. But if you are having something like text, you still need to do it, because if the data is not proper, right, it will still have a problem. So I mean, any kind of data, we are not doing feature extraction, but we can still do cleaning so that the data part is clear at least. So we'll be covering more in depth of what a neural network and how does it train as such. So we know it works with the help of gradient descent, right? But gradient descent works only for one layer. We'll see how that can be used to train multiple layers together in the part of next class, and similarly other things that are involved. Okay, great. Yeah. How about others? So what do you feel about the course? Like, is this part, I mean, everything going clear, or do you want something to change? Because we'll be increasing pace a little bit over the next few days from now onwards. So we have gone at a little lower pace so far, so that things are clear at this point of time. We'll try to increase pace in the coming few classes. Okay, great. So has any one of you already done deep learning, anything related to deep learning, like training a neural network or something like that before? Okay. Okay. So we'll be doing that. Great. So please post questions if you have anything related to the content today, or if not, we'll take a leave and we'll meet again in the next class. Okay, then I'll be sharing the content of today's class. You can go through it, and similarly, I might share some videos. You can go through them as well, so that would help you in your understanding of how a neural network works. So I'll be sharing some interesting videos which reveal the internals of neural network, and I mean, it has very good visualizations as well. So please go through them. So those are very beautiful as such. Those are from a author called 3 Blue 1 Brown in YouTube. So it is very beautiful. I'll be sharing the videos. Okay, cool. Then let's take a break for today. We'll meet in the next class. Good night, everyone.